Hello and welcome to episode 250 of the Clean Energy Show. I'm Brian Stockton.
And I'm James Whittingham. This week, palm oil is an environmental terrorist, but precision fermentation, a fake but real palm oil, just hit industrial scale production. Just like my bowels.
New York City is planning to hand out free e-bikes to couriers and delivery people who have unsafe batteries in their bikes. But there's no plans to replace people's handguns because those are all perfectly safe.
Russia's conflict with Ukraine is causing increased emissions because passenger and cargo planes have to take diverted routes around the war zone. What's to say with me in calories in elementary school when I had to walk around bullies, Brian?
France is planning to build a gigawatt of nuclear power to support the needs of AI. Why? Because everyone's two favorite things are nuclear power and AI.
All that and more on this edition of the Clean Energy Show. And heavy trucks are electrifying quickly in China. Brian, I can hear construction has begun at your house, even though...
Yes.
Why? Why?
Well, it's unfortunate timing because we did start the podcast a while ago, and we had to start again due to technical difficulties.
It was too much of an ordeal to move the production to your bomb shelter last week for our 5th anniversary episode, and nothing's working since.
If you hear hammering in the background, I apologize, but there's things going on here.
Yeah, it's not you. You're not fidgeting. There's actual construction going on, Brian.
Okay, so let's start by talking about the weather. This is our favorite topic usually, especially when we're in one of these ridiculous cold snaps.
Let me start by just asking Alexa. Alexa, what's the temperature?
Right now, it's minus 32 degrees Celsius.
It went up 5 degrees since we first recorded the podcast. It was 37. Then we had some technical issues for about 30 minutes. Yes, well, it's terrible outside, isn't it?
It's ridiculous, and I always complain that it's not the cold, it's the fact that it goes on a long time. The entire winter goes on a long time. The spring is always way later than I think it's going to be. And usually when it's cold, it's only for 2 or 3 days or so, and then it warms up to -5. The normal temperature for this time is -7 during the day.
Sure.
So that's normal.
Boy, would that be balmy.
But this is one of the worst cold snaps I can think of. It's been 3 or 4 weeks now where it's been mostly below -20.
Yeah, and the way my Nissan Leaf works, my old Nissan Leaf, it keeps charging as it heats the battery, so it goes up to 100%, like really, truly 100%, not 100% of your dash, but like an actual 100% of the battery, and that's not good for it. So I have to go and unplug it and keep it unplugged, which is what I have to do now.
When it's this cold, you keep it unplugged, which seems crazy, but it works for the Leaf.
Yeah, it's heating the battery with about 300 watts or so of electricity. I looked at my app to see what it was doing. And the bolt, well, my wife accidentally left it unplugged last night, the night before last, at -38 Celsius, and it did not start. And I knew that this was an issue with the bolt if you have to plug it in cold weather because it doesn't like to heat it like the Leaf does. You have to plug it in.
Yeah, typically electric cars, they will still work when it's -40.
It's a choice by GM though, Brian, but
Yeah, they made a choice that if it's this cold, you have to plug it in or you're out of luck. Now, I'm assuming that it could heat up on its own maybe, but it wants you to plug it in.
It's a choice. It's a choice. But yeah, here's a clip of my video on Patreon. Battery too cold. Now it says vehicle power reduced due to temperature. Ice possible. That's cute. It's possible. It's possible my eyebrows have ice on them. And they did, Brian. I can confirm they did. If you have facial hair in this weather and you breathe, ice forms. That's some weird pictures.
And we were talking about that fabulous YouTube channel that's from Yakutsk in Siberia in Russia. They have amazing videos about what it's like to live there when it's -50. And typically they are colder than us. They're the coldest inhabited place on Earth. It's a real city. But the last couple of days, we have been colder than Yakutsk.
Yes, and I like the way you say that. And, if you watch my video, it's for free for everybody on our Patreon page. I plugged the bolt in and tried it an hour later. It was perfectly fine. I don't know if it would have taken 5 minutes, 10 minutes, half an hour, but in an hour, it was definitely working fine. And the battery had heated up. It's just a choice that GM makes. Of course, most people don't. There's only a few million people who live in the prairies of Canada, really. And they're not going to make their vehicles for us. I mean, Tesla vehicles had some issues at first, and but they will eventually come around. It's just not a priority, but yeah.
And what usually happens is if it's minus 40, if I get into my Tesla, I've seen videos. I've never left mine unplugged at minus 40, but typically it'll still start. You drive it around a bit, it warms itself up, and eventually you get all of your power back. Like typically there's reduced power when it's that cold. But, electric cars have lots of acceleration, so it's okay if you lose a bit of power.
Yeah, and I like I said before, I don't even notice it, because I'm not flooring it. But yeah, you don't even know. It says reduced propulsion, but even merging onto an expressway, it's not an issue. So yeah, my car worked fine after that. It's just one of those things. I mean, if it stayed at minus 37 and my wife was at work and she wasn't driving the car, I would say, warm it up at noon. And by the way, the cars get very warm very fast. Like even in this weather, the Bolt was warm in just a couple of minutes. It was pretty cozy in there.
I just had a memory of like when I was a kid in elementary school and there would be like the Christmas pageant. I remember it like they would stop the Christmas pageant halfway through so everyone could go out and start their cars and then come back in for the second half.
Because I've been to some really cold Christmas pageants. It was tradition for our kids that it was the coldest night of the year. And then, of course, there's a million people there and you have to walk for 2 or 3 blocks in very cold weather and then unbundle yourself inside this very humid, stuffy place with all these kids.
Yeah, and people didn't have remote starts back then either. So yeah, that was what we did.
That's amazing. I didn't know that. That's good to know. So I belong to this Facebook group for my community in Uplands here where I live. And it's really weird because you learn about other people's. I mentioned before that somebody posted, asking where they could get a Brazilian wax. I don't need to know that about people.
Yeah.
And then everyone,
want to know what
all
my
these other
neighbors are
women
up to.
chimed in and said, oh, you go here and it's a great deal. And then so-and-so is really great. Doris is wonderful. I don't need to know that business, but yeah, I learn all kinds of things out there. And it seems like people have no shames these days. We grew up in an era of shame, Brian.
People need to relearn their shame.
Yes, relearn your shame, people. So other people have been posting, I need a boost and so forth. And some people say, well, I got out of the hospital. Can you shovel my walk? And they do. And it's very moving that these people actually help their neighbors. But there's a lot of people asking for boosts.
Yeah, if you're in a gas car, it's minus 40 and it doesn't start, you get a boost by hooking up another battery from another car, and that's usually enough to start it.
Because the battery, your little 12-volt battery, is tasked with overturning a combustion engine with frozen oil. And we plug our cars in to heat that oil, but sometimes it's not enough. They're called block heaters. They're a little hole in the engine wall that is there for all cars, and you just add, when they're sold in Canada, you get, in some parts of Canada, you're sold this little device, and it's a 120-volt extension cord. I remember when I drove to California, somebody looked at our Prius with a little, normal extension plug coming out of it, and they said, is that electric? And I said, no, that's for the block heater. What's a block heater? Well, long story. But yeah, somebody had a combustion Equinox from GM. Now, we've talked about the electric Equinox, which has now come out. Well, yeah, he wanted to warm up his turbo because his turbo was frozen. So he was asking for a garage to warm up somebody's, personal heated garage to warm up so he could go on a trip. People have all kinds of problems, but not my cars. Once you plugged it in, it was golden. And, it's not going to, I've never had a problem with our cars in cold weather, extremely cold weather, which is why I make videos, because I know it's a novelty for other people in the world. So there's all kinds of things that can cause problems with that combustion engine, the ice building up on the air intake and on pressure sensors and things. And but mostly it's the battery just not, being able to turn over the engine. And I said before, I was parked overnight at a girlfriend's apartment once and it was really cold. My car wouldn't start. The tow truck driver said, it's too cold to make fire. And he was right. You have to make fire. You have to have air combust in these extreme temperatures, and it's very bad. I just want to remind people that we've got a Patreon podcast out last week, and on it we talked about Keith Bradsher, a Beijing bureau chief for the New York Times. He was on a podcast talking about how and explaining why China was dominating their EV production.
Where you see China's most impressive progress is in the car industry.
What do you mean by that?
Well, 5 years ago, China only exported a few cars, and they were very cheap, junky cars that went to markets like Syria's market. They weren't competitive on an international market. Today, China has very quickly, just in 5 years, passed Japan, South Korea, Germany, to become, by a wide margin, the world's largest car exporter. And the cars that China is selling overseas are no longer junky. They are good quality cars at very affordable prices. And a quarter of these cars being exported by China are electric cars, which may be the future.
Yeah, great podcast. We do this every month for people in our Clean Club who support our show. And yeah, we've also got a contest to talk about what we're coming up. My son sent me a picture from the Vancouver area in Western Canada on the coast of a Tesla dealership there with a bunch of, well, graffiti, some anti-Elon and anti-Nazi graffiti. And a lot of people think that that's going to be an issue on their sales, and it's hard to quantify that. But Brian, I've advised you before never to take stock advice from me. And I think that should be true for our listeners as well. However, I'm going to give it to you anyway. I think you got to get out of Tesla. You got to, I don't see it. Like, Elon is saying, well, we're going to dominate, and all the fanboys are saying we're going to dominate self-driving and we're going to have robotaxis spread across the world just like that because, of all the information we have. Well, there's other systems out there. Some are better. And, if I had a choice, I'm not going to take a Nazi's frickin' robotaxi. I'm going to, not only are people not going to buy the cars, they're not going to take his bloody robotaxi because he's not going to be the only person doing it. So I'm scared. I think it's a bubble, and I think the people who are kind of in the Tesla cult are all have stocks as well. Maybe that helps them be a little bit unreasonable when they're making a lot of money off of it on paper. But yeah, I like I said though, don't take stock advice from James ever because I know nothing.
Well, I've done comparisons with, like, if you look at the revenue of Apple versus the value of the company and the revenue of Tesla versus the value of the company, they're not that far off. It's slightly overvalued, but most of that growth of the robotaxi and stuff is not really built into the stock price. So I'm not particularly worried about that.
Last week, Brian, just last week, we talked about our top TikTok video and our 50-year anniversary special from the bomb shelter at your house about birds dying at a solar thermal plant. Well, guess what? Just after we did that, there was a news story about, that very plant shutting down. What was once the world's largest solar power plant of its type, this is where all these concentric mirrors shine the sun onto this, tower. It actually heats it. It's not the same as a solar panel that makes electricity. This is reflecting the sun to make heat, and then that turns into electricity via steam and a turbine. So it appears that this type appears to be headed for closure 11 years after opening under pressure from cheaper green energy sources. In other words, traditional solar panels, like you yourself said last week, why not just get a normal PV panel and make it simple? Meanwhile, environmentalists continue to blame the Mojave Desert plant for killing thousands of birds and tortoises. Tortoises too! What? How do you kill a tortoise?
What?
How do you kill a tortoise with these mirrors that are off the ground? Are they climbing up onto the mirror and going like an ant under a magnifying glass?
The rare flying tortoise, I guess.
Yeah, well, there is such a thing. The Avanpa solar plant formally opened in 2014 on roughly 5 square miles, 13 square kilometers, of federal land near the California-Nevada border. Though it was hailed at the time as a breakthrough moment for clean energy, its power has been struggling to compete with cheaper solar technologies. Well, that's it then.
Yeah.
Solar thermal is dead. I declared it right here on the show, Brian.
Well, 11 years ago, solar PV panels were a lot more expensive, but in that 11 years, we know the prices have dropped by an insane amount. So all of these alternatives, which once seemed possible, now maybe not so much.
Yeah, and that story can be found on CTV News, actually a Canadian site. Lots of stories of people asking for boosts, but yeah, the cold weather continues, but it'll be approximately 40 degrees Celsius warmer by next weekend. And even though the city will crumble, I can't wait, Brian.
Yeah, I'm not sure I believe it. There's very loud sawing going on right now in the background.
It's not a mosquito?
I apologize.
That sounds like a mosquito. Really bad mosquito.
Really bad mosquitoes. So I'm just going to have to talk through it, I guess. But so speaking of Saskatchewan, the place where we live, there's a YouTube channel that we've talked about before called Undecided with Matt Farrell. And weirdly enough, I looked on the YouTube this morning and he had actually come to Saskatchewan. Now, he's too much of a coward to come in the winter. So This
There you
video
heard
appears to...
One YouTuber, Brian Stockton, is calling Matt Farrell a coward. Are you listening, Matt?
Yeah, so he apparently came in the summer. The video just came out today, but the footage appears to be from last summer, and it's a really interesting wind energy project near my cottage, actually, and we've mentioned it in passing before.
Yeah.
It's quite
And
close
by
to
the way,
my
I love his
cottage.
channel. I've been watching his channel for years, and it's weird to see him come here
Yeah,
from, I don't know, where does he live?
it's like
Northeast
somewhere,
US, somewhere?
more south than that, I think.
Okay.
Yeah, I couldn't find out. Yeah, but yeah, he's got, millions of subscribers. Great channel. We've mentioned it before because he often covers clean energy topics.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's too bad we didn't know he was coming. We could have rolled out the red carpet or
And believe me, we have red carpet ready to roll.
Yeah. And it's a weird place to come to. It's not easy to get here, especially from where he is. So kudos to him for making the trek. It would have been a couple of flights and then a long drive out to this site, but they gave him access to this wind farm that's being built near my cottage, up to 200 megawatts. So maybe because it's near my cottage, maybe I'll be getting that clean energy out there. I'm not sure.
Yeah, you must be, though. You must be. Well, it's hard to, you never know with the grid, but yeah, I would think that you'd be getting some. So your grid just got cleaner, maybe.
Maybe. We're about halfway between that wind farm and then the giant coal plant. So maybe I'll be getting a mixture of both. I'm not sure. It's probably all coal right now. But anyway, I took out a couple of clips. I thought this was super interesting. So here's the first clip, Matt Farrell looking at these wind turbines. And take note of how he says Saskatchewan.
Hearing about how massive wind turbines are built is one thing, but seeing it is another. Last year, I got to visit the Beckevar Wind Farm in Saskatchewan, Canada, months ahead of its completion in November of 2024. As I explored the project construction site, I witnessed firsthand the vast amount of effort it takes to get 36 turbines up and running. Now, you might be thinking, if it was this loud under construction, how do the turbines sound when they're actually in use? Well, Chad showed me that there were mitigations put in place to reduce the noise.
So those are the serrations.
Yeah.
You can imagine a 77-meter blade spinning and the sound that it would have coming off of it.
Okay.
So it just helps reduce that sound.
Yeah, they're like shark's teeth on the edge of the blade.
Yeah. And I wasn't sure I had seen that before. Were you aware of that?
No,
yeah.
Me too. I hadn't either.
Yeah, so that was news to me. Just these little sort of, shark's teeth on and they, seem to be made out of plastic or something. And you could see how it would diffuse the wind sound as the turbine spins. So that was
by the way,
news
Matt,
to
if
me.
you come to us, we could have told you how to pronounce Saskatchewan.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. People always, for some reason, when they're not here, they emphasize the first two syllables, Saskatchewan. But really, it's just you emphasize just the second syllable, Saskatchewan.
When we hit a deer in Wyoming and the state trooper finally came, he said, "And what's this place you're from?" I said, "Don't even bother," and he just made him laugh. And I said, "Just give up. You'll never get it."
Yeah,
it's a hard thing to attempt at the be. I can't blame anyone for getting it wrong, but yeah.
No, I can't. But for future reference, it's emphasis on the second syllable, and you just let everything else just go. Saskatchewan. You just let everything else go.
Just let it go, people. Just let it go. Just like the person who's sawing in your bomb shelter bathroom. The Clean Energy Show toilet will be low flow, I assume. Did you pick it out yet?
There's new regulations that basically all toilets have to be low flow now. I just learned that recently.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah, they're like maximum of like 4.5 liters or something on every single toilet now. So yeah, we're getting a bathroom renovation and it's very bad timing and very loud instruments being used. But anyway, so move on to the second clip. This one's about the environmental impact of this particular wind farm.
When it comes to the environment, the project had a dedicated supervisor role through RES.
I am responsible for ensuring that the environment in this area is protected and is put back when we finish this project, that it is not impacted in a substantial way that alters the way of life around here or alters habitats and wildlife in the area.
Now that the project is complete, the power the turbines are generating, which is up to 200 megawatts at full capacity, is being sold to the Saskatchewan Power Corporation, or Sask Power. And in a press release announcing Beckevar coming online, Chief Erica Bodana of Cowessess First Nation, which has joint ownership of the farm, had this to say: "We're excited to be a part of this important initiative and to see it come to completion. As Indigenous people, we feel it's our duty to not only invest in clean energy, but to place ourselves front and center as leaders in clean energy. Jotun, wind, and Cree plays an important role in our cultural ways of being, and and we firmly believe this mighty spirit has many more teachings and blessings to bestow upon us all.
Yeah, I would say that it's a shame that they have to be the leader, that First Nations around here have to be a leader in clean energy, because the utility that they mentioned is a basket case of 20th century thinking, and they're bloody hopeless.
Yeah, they could be doing this themselves, but hats off to the Cowessess First Nation for stepping in where others have not, and the other partners in this. It's a great project. 200 megawatts is nothing to sneeze at. That's some serious power.
It's decent.
Yeah, absolutely decent. And yeah, hats off to Matt Farrell for coming all the way up here, but not in the winter because he's a coward.
Well, maybe he tried and his plane went down to Toronto yesterday. That was something.
Yes, that plane in Toronto at the Toronto airport flipped over. So far, everyone has survived.
Yeah, and the right landing gear hit down too hard in very windy and snowy conditions, and it collapsed. And then the right wing hit the runway, and then that just allowed it to toss over. People were upside down.
Crazy.
I wonder what would happen to me, because I'm so heavy that if I let go, I would break my neck for sure. So I couldn't pop my seatbelt. I just have to hang there. I don't know. It was a horrible thing. There's been a lot of air accidents lately, but that really has little to do with what we've been doing here on the show.
Okay, so moving on to New York City. We've talked about New York many times when it comes to electric bicycles because they've had problems with residential fires caused by e-bike batteries that are not fully certified. These are cheap bikes, and you have couriers and delivery people that use these for their work. They can't necessarily afford the top-end ones, and if it's not UL certified, it's not necessarily safe, and they do occasionally catch fire, and New York has been really working hard to fix this problem. And the innovative solution they've come up with now is to just give out free bikes. So it's basically a trade-in program where you can trade in your uncertified bike, or in some cases, like scooters as well, are used for this kind of work. And so, yeah, they've started to accept applications for this. It's not clear quite how many they're going to do. And I suspect, they're going to run out of free bikes like other programs, similar programs have had. But yeah, well, it's a great way, I think, to tackle the problem head on.
Yeah. And, it's not the lithium ion batteries themselves that are the problem. It's the shoddy assembly of them and charging aspect, because I've got power tools. Most people will have power tools in the home with a lithium ion battery. It's got a good charger on it, a many thing. I got a weed whacker. I've got a drill. I've got a snow shovel. They all have certified good batteries on them. But some of these e-bikes from China were uncertified and could cause fires.
You have electric socks, for God's sake.
I have electric socks, Brian. Have not ignited yet, thankfully. The day they do, though, you'll hear about it. You'll hear the screaming from your bomb shelter. So we will be applying, sound fixes to your construction. So you might hear just weird. It may not sound like construction. You might just hear weird noises dip in and out from time to time.
We'll find out.
We'll find out. Yeah, it'll be fun. So, palm oil is horrible. You know that, right? Everybody knows that. It's horrible. It's in a lot of our processed foods.
Yeah, and tell us why it's horrible.
Well, it destroys rainforest. That's one of the biggest reasons that people knock down rainforests to make more palm oil. It's not the only reason.
Yeah, because it is a desirable thing for some people.
So this story is from the Veg Economist by way of Rethink X, Tony Seba's think tank, that we often mention on the show from the beginning days of our podcast. If you've missed our anniversary episode, it's on YouTube with 3 cameras. It's on everywhere else. Go back and listen to it. Palm oil production drives deforestation, wiping out rainforests in Indonesia, Malaysia, and other places, threatening species like orangutans and tigers. Clearing land for plantations releases massive carbon emissions, worsening climate change. So yeah, when you clear these plantations, they're not sucking carbon dioxide out of the air anymore, and they get burnt, and that, is bad too. So peatlands and crucial carbon sinks are often drained and burned. So these wet sort of soil places are drained and then they're dried up and then burned, and that really accelerates global warming. The industry also causes soil degradation, water pollution, and biodiversity loss. While palm oil is efficient compared to other vegetable oils, its environmental cost is severe. Without stronger regulations and sustainable practices, its expansion will continue to fuel deforestation, and climate change, making it a major concern for conservationists and environmentalists worldwide. A Dutch biotech company, however, Brian, called Nopalm, that's one word, Nopalm, its full name is Nopalm Ingredients, just made a big breakthrough. They figured out how to produce palm oil using fermentation. This is precision fermentation, something we mentioned on the show. This is going to rule the world of food, and it can be made locally in vats that resemble a brewery, basically replicating the original substance identically, but not doing the environmental damage. Take milk, for example. Basically, they grow special yeast that turns leftover food waste into oil, and now they've done this on a huge scale. This is the important part. With anything we talk about, they have to ramp it up and do it at an industrial scale. And that can be hard and sometimes impossible or take decades. Well, they've done it, though. 120,000 liters of it, which is a first for the industry. They worked with another company to prove that this process really works, showing that we can create food-grade oil without cutting down palm trees. It's a big step towards making sure more eco-friendly oils are in our future. The development presents a promising alternative to palm oil and other tropical fats, addressing environmental impacts associated with traditional oil production, according to Nopalm Ingredients. Its fermentation process results in 90% lower carbon emissions than normal palm oil and requires 99% less land use compared to normal palm oil production. 3 years ago, Brian, they were at the bench scale. Last summer, they hit 5,000, but now 120,000 liters of production. Give me that palm oil. I'll take it. Palm oil demand, this is another thing. There's not enough of the stuff.
Yeah.
The demand is growing 4% annually, so the need for sustainable alternatives has never been more urgent. And again, link to that story is in the Veggie Economist.
Yeah, that's great to know. And precision fermentation is definitely something to watch in the coming years. All right, it looks like it's time to open up the mailbag. We have some listener mail here. This one is from Weldon. And Weldon says, recently purchased a battery electric vehicle for my wife to drive to work. And she texted me this morning in minus 30 Winnipeg. So annoying. All the exhaust fumes from the gas cars can't even see. LOL. And you and I have experienced this problem
firsthand. This happened to me the other day. Yeah, and if you want to see what it looks like, search up Nissan Leaf in minus 40. That's our video from when I ran the Leaf in minus 40. And there's a short clip of it driving. If you're at a stoplight, there's lots of condensation coming out of the exhaust. And then they hit the floor of the light turns green. And I literally had to, it was like hitting fog with zero visibility. I had to stop.
Yeah.
And it's so frustrating because, there's a better way, people.
It's not safe, and it's not particularly pleasant to look at either.
Yeah. Thanks, Weldon, for dropping us that note on Patreon. Contact us because we have a contest coming up. We are giving away a 1-year free membership at our Clean Club that will give the winner all the privileges of the supporter level, which is ad-free episodes, high-quality versions of our show, and early access as soon as the show is done, Discord server access, as well as the privileges of the Clean Club tier, which starts at $5 a month, access to all our Patreon episodes of the podcast, diving deeper into clean energy and occasionally our personal lives, monthly shoutouts on the podcast, and your credit on our video podcast, plus merch, discounts, and exclusive bonus content. Odds, Brian, are very high of someone winning this. All you have to do is create a free Patreon account and follow us on Patreon. And those people who have already done, you're included in the contest. And those people who are at our supporter level but don't have, the Clean Club privileges, you're entered as well. So everybody's entered, but still, much better chance of winning than a lottery.
So you said higher quality versions of the show. Does that mean the show is just better, or maybe without
we have
all
different
of this
hosts.
background
We bring
noise?
in different AI hosts. No,
different
It
hosts.
is audio quality, as I should have pointed out. Better audio quality, pristine.
So it's
CD.
a different
it's a
feed
different.
you can subscribe to.
Yeah, it's a bigger, fatter file with CD quality audio. We'd love to hear from our listeners. Please contact us by email at cleanenergyshow@gmail.com and leave us a voicemail if you feel inclined. Speakpipe.com/cleanenergyshow so we can hear your voice. anything you have on your minds. We always love to hear anything our listeners have to say. Sometimes it's a question, sometimes it's a comment, sometimes it's an observation about how ridiculous the world is, with his wife trying to drive through a fog of, exhaust from cars and not being able to do it. And join our conversation on the Patreon page. That's where all our social media content is. I love our Patreon page because it's just us. It's not creeps. There's no bad people around. It's just us, and it's a nice, clean, happy place, Brian.
Okay, so quick story here about Rivian. This is the electric car maker in the U.S. We've talked about their delivery vans before because they're quite cool. They're mostly run by Amazon. Amazon had an exclusive deal to buy these vans.
Right around when we started the show, there was 100,000, order by 2030. That's one of the first stories we covered, and now it's different.
Yeah. It says they've delivered 20,000 so far to Amazon, which is not the 100, but that's nothing to sneeze
They're
at.
pretty cool, too. Like, if you've seen any of the, I think Marquez Brownlee had a review of them, and it's like, they're very cool. And the drivers love them.
Yeah, and of course, they're customized specifically for Amazon, but now you can buy, it's sort of like the Bear van starting at $79,000 US, which is expensive. Probably more expensive if you have to fit it out for whatever purpose you need it for. But I didn't think that was crazy for such a high quality vehicle. And so these are now available to buy for people other than Amazon.
Well, that's cool. I hope they do. And I hope they're able to make a lot of them because, as we just said, or we'll be talking about in our final story of the week, China is going big on this stuff. I occasionally see e-transit vans from Ford that are electric. Like I know some businesses. There was one business in Saskatoon up north from us that they said, basically what they used to spend in gas is what they're spending on, the payment for this vehicle, the lease payment on the vehicle. And then there's no real, cost after that. So it was a huge savings for them, even though they're pretty expensive still. If you're driving around a lot and you're doing deliveries, it can add up to a lot of money. So that's good to see. And, because I know there's lots of other people doing it too, but those Rivian vans show a lot of promise for being a lot better than some of the competition. Maybe a little more expensive too. Brian, Russia's war is driving up emissions by forcing planes to reroute. This is from Yale Environment. Since the war in Ukraine started, Western airlines have had to take longer routes to avoid flying over Russia and Ukraine, which has increased pollution from planes. If you have to fly, hundreds of miles in some cases further, maybe even more than hundreds. After Russia invaded in February 2022, it banned Western planes from its airspace. At first, fewer flights went between Western countries and East Asia, but airlines eventually found new routes. These new paths went south of Russia or over the Arctic, adding extra flight time. And a study has found that 1,100 flights per day were affected, using 13% more fuel on those flights. Now, what does this mean overall? It means a 1% higher emissions in aviation for the whole world, just because of this bloody conflict that should have never happened is going on. That's, one of these stupid things, but also it has made Europe use less gas from Russia and become more dependent on renewable energy. So I think there's a plus balance in that equation.
Yes, in many ways it has sped up the switch to clean energy. So on to France now. This is from Engadget. France has pledged to build 1 gigawatt of new nuclear, but it's for AI. It's for AI data centers. And France, of course, is well known for its nuclear. They've been one of the big nuclear countries for many years. So they have made an announcement that they're going to go for another gigawatt of nuclear in France. But yeah, it's mostly for AI, which seems kind of odd. And who knows if it's going to happen soon enough for AI, because the AI revolution is happening very quickly, and nuclear, as we know, does take a while to build.
Oh, okay. Well, a lot of places in the world are trying to get in on AI, but AI, because it involves, in some cases, trailers, like truck trailers full of computers, in some case, mobile home type, module things, that all these places, and the computers produce waste heat, and there's fans that are used to power and cool the machines. In some cases, they're liquid cooled, and it just uses a lot of energy because training AI models requires supercomputers by the thousands, I imagine, working night and day trying to teach a new model to the AI. And yeah, that's why it was significant in China recently. We talked about their competing AI used a lot less electricity. So that's encouraging.
Yeah, and there was a story this week from the International Energy Agency, and they, of course, are predicting that energy use worldwide is going to go up by something like 4% a year, which is, when you think about the whole world's use, is a lot of power. But they're also predicting that clean energy will be built fast enough to fill in those increases.
Certainly, if you're building a new industry and it requires energy, you want the cheapest as well. Not only do you want it to be clean, but those two things work out, and they encourage you to be clean. So yeah, that's encouraging. And we have a story on our Patreon page, a gift link that's only going to last about 4 more days. So if you're listening to this podcast late, it doesn't work. For some reason, at Bloomberg, they choose to make only their gift links work for only 5 days. But yeah, it's there if you're quick on our site, or if you have a subscription, or maybe if you haven't been to Bloomberg in a while, it'll let you read that article. But yeah, cooling is one of the big things, Brian. Cooling. And not only is there more people getting access to middle-class lifestyle where you can go buy an air conditioner, say in India, where it's bloody hot, and even a window air conditioner is going to change your life. It's becoming hotter in these places, and places like west coast of North America, the northwest coast of Oregon and Washington State and British Columbia, they're now getting heat waves where no one has an air conditioner, and they're going to have to go buy one now because it's getting hot where it wasn't before. So those two things are contributing. But cooling is, we talk about AI and EVs, but it's cooling that is the biggest contributor of these increased energy demand. And there's conflicting stories that go around, but that's what's basically going on. Coming up next, Brian, is the Lightning Round. Stay tuned. It's time for the Lightning Round.
The Lightning Round is a fast-paced look at the latest headlines in climate, clean energy, and transportation.
Mr. Stockton, since the beginning of our podcast, we've often updated stories on the state of solid-state batteries. This is a new kind of battery that doesn't have liquid electrolytes in it. It is more of a solid thing. There's lots of benefits to that. It can charge fast. It can have a higher energy density, which means the batteries are smaller and lighter. Or maybe you can have the same car might have twice the range, or it might have, half the weight, and all these things add up to great things with mobility with solid-state batteries and even airplanes. So, yeah, but it's an elusive. It's a white whale that keeps getting pushed back. I remember Toyota said they're going to have one by 2025. No, they're not. And even the big boys, the Chinese battery makers that have 100,000 engineers working for them, they're still having trouble commercializing this stuff. But BYD, which is the second biggest battery maker in the world, they're also a car maker in China, has announced last week that they're coming to market with these. We'll have to see. They usually don't fool around in China when they say something's coming. BYD built a 60 amp hour full solid-state battery pack in 2024, which they are currently testing. Apparently it's 1200 volts, like a Hyundai is 800. And my car is 400. Both my cars are 400 volts, so they don't charge as fast. They're 72 kilowatt hours, but the energy density, this is something that is measured in watt hours per kilogram. So think of it as, this one is 400 watt hours per kilogram. So think about 1 kilogram of battery giving you 400 watts for an hour. So it is a measurement of how much storage the battery does. Now that's significant, 400 watt hours per kilogram, because current batteries that are in EVs often have a density of only 150 to 250 kilowatt hours currently per kilogram. So if you think about it that way, it's doubling the energy density, which is very significant for a lot of things. Twice the energy with the same space and volume and take up the same weight. You could have maybe a car with twice the range, but it doesn't have to have twice the range because we have long-range cars now, don't we? I mean, we have cars that go as far as you really need them to go now. But,
Yeah, if there's lots of chargers where you live, you don't really need the range.
So if you have, say, a 600 kilometer range car, that's probably fine because your bladder's not going to last 600 kilometers. There's no way. If you are, I want you to write in and tell me because it's just unnatural. And I want you to be studied by scientists if there are any left. So yeah, if you had that same car and that battery weighed half as much and took up half the space and still went 600 kilometers, it would go even more than 600 kilometers because you would be reducing hundreds of pounds of weight from that car. So it would do even better. Yeah, and then you could put it in a plane, perhaps. More flight time would be possible. They're also safer. They charge faster. They're less volatile to start a fire. So it's pretty exciting. Yeah. So 2027, they're going to put them in high-end vehicles, which is often where we see developments with anything, driver safety. They start in the Mercedes and then they trickle down to your high-end Santa Fe or whatever. So 2027, that's just 2 years from now, they're going to be putting these in high-end vehicles. Why? Because they need to get the costs down. It's one of the things about bringing something to production is getting that cost at a reasonable price. And by 2030, they're going to be everywhere, they said. And you can read that story on Electric. And that brings us to a CS Fast Fact. Okay, this is car imports for the year that is concluded, 2024. In the United States of America, 8 million, or 46% of total home market is imports. And Mr. T wants to cut that. So you're not going to be able to buy a Toyota anymore, or it's going to have a huge charge for it. In China, it's 3%. So they used to import cars a lot. And that has changed on a dime. They are now making all their cars, basically. Japan, it's just 5% of cars are imported, and we can see that there's going to be pressure on that from Chinese imports. Consumer and clean energy advocates in Indiana are calling for a moratorium on new hyperscale data centers, which are driving a huge surge in power demand there, until state leaders can study their potential impact on the electric grid and utility bills. Sometimes, in some places, these data centers come in and jack up your utility bills because they have to create a whole bunch more power generation suddenly.
Yeah.
And they put that on the consumer, and that's no good. The new Airbus A321 XLR extra long range version claims 30% reduction in fuel per passenger seat. The Airbus 321 XLR saves fuel through a combination of advanced engines, which are getting a little bit better for fuel economy, aerodynamic improvements, and a lighter aircraft structure. Ukraine today, early this week, if you're listening later, has hit more oil assets in Russia, including a pipeline pumping station owned by Western oil interests. Why does that make me feel guiltily good? Russia shouldn't be allowed to sell oil if they're boycotted from doing so and funding their wars. Researchers looked at, this is from techexplore.com, the link is there for you. Researchers looked at carbon capture vis renewables. Now, that coal plant that you mentioned near your cottage is trying to capture some of its carbon, but it's doing a crappy job. 50% instead of 90% or something like that. So this is what the study found. If you spend $1 on carbon capture instead of on wind, water, and solar, you are increasing CO2, air pollution, energy requirements, energy costs, pipelines, and total social costs. Well, no kidding. We knew that. It's just common sense. We've said that before on the show.
Yeah, I think we ran the numbers one time on how many solar panels they could have bought for what it cost to do that carbon capture, and it was in the tens of millions, I think.
No, they couldn't do that. Interest in electric vehicles grew substantially in 2024. According to a survey from CDK Global, 31% of gas car shoppers plan to buy an EV. That's up from 18% in 2023, so that's doubled pretty much. There are still big misconceptions, however, about the cost of EV ownership across car buyers, though they found. EV charging infrastructure is costly, especially DC fast charging equipment. Yeah, only DC fast charging equipment, I would say. A normal charging at home isn't that costly. Tesla has revealed that the average U.S. supercharging stall costs about $40,000 to $45,000 U.S. That's from evchargingstations.com. Now, Brian, Tesla's about the best at doing this, becoming the most efficient at it. They've got factories where they're building these chargers on cement slabs before they even go out for efficiency's sake. And yet that is still the cost of those fast chargers.
Yeah, I mean, I guess you can say that charger can last for hopefully decades or at least many, many years. So hopefully that high upfront cost is still worth it.
Alberta's home insurance costs. This is Alberta, the province next to us. Saskatchewan, if you pronounce it correctly. Home of the oil sands, home of most of Canada's oil, and Texas of the North, if you will. Their home insurance costs have surged 90% in 10 years. Why? Well, there's more fires, there's more floods, there's more hailstorms. You know, my poor brother-in-law, he's always got an RV getting battered by hail out there.
Yeah.
And now the insurance companies run 5 planes seeding the clouds during possible hail events because it's incredible. It's like the hail. We're not talking about tornadoes here. We're not talking about huge windstorms. We're just talking about big hail that, wrecks buildings and cars. And that has been something that never used to happen. I can tell you, my relatives have been out there for my whole lifetime pretty much. And yeah, they never had those problems until the last 15 years, and now they're really scared of it.
Yeah, and we have slightly different weather systems here, so it doesn't seem to be happening here. The hail here is still quite small, but who knows?
Yeah, Calgary is now a hail capital of Canada. So yeah, that and more fires. Remember last summer was the wildfire in Jasper National Park, wiping out a third of the town of Jasper, which is one of the most beautiful places ever. Electricity demand is set to increase sharply in the coming years as people around the world use more power to run air conditioners, industry, and a growing fleet of data centers, the IEA stated, and you referenced that. Well, I have the Bloomberg clip there in your show notes if you want to go look at that link. And finally this week, heavy-duty trucks are going electric in China in a big way. Their sales of all-electric or fuel cell trucks have shot up 96% year over year. That is a huge jump. That's beyond S-curve level, Brian. That's straight up pretty much. 99% of those are battery electric, so don't think that fuel cell trucks are making a difference there. They've hit the market share of 21% of all trucks being sold now are electric at the beginning of this year. Now, when we started this podcast, it was basically 0 point something. Then it became 2 or 3% and 4% and 5%, and it's shot up to 21%. And yeah, that is good. And we said it was going to happen. It is last mile delivery going electric. It makes a lot of sense. And it is driven by the economics of saving money.
Yeah, the speed of this happening is going super fast, especially in China. And that is amazing to see. And that is our show for this week. You can contact us, cleanenergyshow@gmail.com, around social media, Clean Energy Pod. You can join our Patreon for free and join our little community there. Rate and review us on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts, and make sure to hit the subscribe button.
And thank you to all our Patreon members who are Clean Club executive members, especially because we get us a shout out on our show every week. Green Bastard, Brent Rotley, and Ryder. And the first of the month, and our other members get a shout out. But you're always going to get your credit on our videos that are on YouTube. Join our Patreon today as a paying member to get access to our exclusive Patreon episodes. And remember, we got a contest. All you got to do is have a free Patreon account. Maybe you already do. Make sure you follow us. And by the way, we're making that draw in early March. So look forward to it. We'll see you again in 7 days.
See you next week.